Let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody to this AT3 webinar. As you know, from time to time, we have different assistive technology vendors come on and talk about their products a little bit and how they might fit into assistive technologies, demonstration or loan centers. Our presenters today are from the Braze blind spot sensor system, which detects objects around the wheelchair and provides audio, visual, and vibration alerts to help prevent collisions and improve wheelchair operation skills. Of course, powered mobility users can experience major collisions resulting in property and wheelchair damage and hospitalization. And so we had one of our AT programs that had contact with Braze and thought it might be a good vendor webinar. The webinar today will be presented by Dr. Pooja Viswanathan, the founder of Braze Mobility. And if you need captions, you can press the CC button at the bottom of your screen. And in terms of asking questions or what'll work out best for the presenters, whether it's during or at the end of your presentation, I'll just let you go ahead and share that. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to you and take it away.
Thank you so much. Just some quick introductions here. My name is Pooja Viswanathan. I'm the CEO and founder of Braze Mobility. I also have with me Terrence Ho on the call, who is our head of partner success. And I'm going to go ahead and share my deck here in terms of questions. During my presentation, if you want to just keep the questions coming on the chat, I will take a peek at the chat every now and then. And if the questions are already going to be answered in the presentation, then I'll just sort of let the presentation run its course. But if there are questions there that I don't think will be addressed, then I will certainly answer them. And we'll definitely also have time for Q&A at the end, where I hope that you'll also unmic or ask your questions in the chat. But I'd love for this webinar to be as interactive as possible. So please do keep the questions coming. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about blind spot sensors for wheelchairs. I'll go through some of our learning objectives here very quickly. We're going to be talking about some of the challenges faced by power mobility device users today. Certainly, some of these challenges are experienced by manual wheelchair users as well, and the blind spot sensor technology is compatible with manual wheelchairs also. But for the purposes of this presentation today, I'm going to be mainly focusing on power. I will talk about some of the benefits of the blind spot sensor technology, some of the diagnoses, symptoms, or scenarios where this technology can be really beneficial to users. I'll talk about some of the different types of feedback modalities that the sensors can provide. And finally, I will also discuss some of the advantages and disadvantages of blind spot sensor technology versus semi-autonomous control. This is technology that you might also see referred to as driver assist systems, but it's essentially semi-autonomous control is when the wheelchair itself takes control and might, for example, slow down or stop. So we'll get into more of that later on in the presentation. So quick background about myself. I actually started in this area of work more than a decade ago. I actually did my PhD and my postdoctoral research on the topic of smart wheelchairs. And the reason I was really inspired to take up this space is because in my experience, I had gone into a long-term care facility for the first time, and I noticed that a lot of residents there were slumped over in manual wheelchairs. They didn't have the strength to self-propel, and they also weren't being allowed to use power mobility because of safety concerns. As a lot of us know, a lot of the residents in long-term care typically have diagnoses of dementia or have some sort of cognitive deficits that might exclude them from the use of power mobility. And so I really saw this as a violation of a fundamental human right. We all have the right to independent mobility, and wanted to see what I could do with sensor technologies and trying to improve and enhance independence and safety with power wheelchair and wheelchair use across the board. So that's my background, and because I've worked so long in the long-term care space, and especially with older adults with cognitive impairment, I also do want to mention that one of the things that I really did take into account when designing the products at Braze is through universal design principles and ensuring that our technology can be accessible to a wide range of clients, regardless of their cognitive ability. So that's something that I've really taken into account. A couple of the major design factors in terms of everything that we design here at Braze is obviously, because of my academic background, we really work hard to incorporate clinical evidence and research evidence into everything that we build here. And we also care a lot about affordability and or funding potential, because I've seen a lot of really innovative and sophisticated technologies come out to market and then really just be too expensive for anyone to be able to afford. And so affordability is also a really big factor in everything that we do here at Braze. Here's just a sneak peek at some of my publications in the field, which are a relatively small proportion of the work done on smart wheelchairs in the academic realm. So the reason I show this is because even though this technology that I'm going to be showing you today is pretty new and innovative when it comes to the complex rehab industry, this is actually work that spanned over several decades in the academic arena. And so, I certainly hope that this sort of technology, while it's very new today, certainly hope that it does become more of a standard and that we see this sort of technology, hopefully in the near future, available on all wheelchairs, and that we'll hopefully also start seeing a lot more sophisticated technologies come out as well. I just wanted to quickly introduce the team, and really because our team is very diverse in terms of our experiences, professional and personal. My co-founder, Dr. Alex Mihalaides, is a internationally recognized leader in technology and aging. He's a professor at the University of Toronto, and also is the head of artificial intelligence and robotics lab at the Toronto Rehab Institute. And so both Alex and I do have fairly diverse expertise, both on the engineering side as well as the clinical side. Alex is also someone who has lived experience with spinal cord injury. The next person here, Terrence, that I just introduced, has experience with customer experience strategy, but is also a family caregiver to his brother, who is a power wheelchair user. We have also David on our team, who has a lot of experience in design and manufacturing. And finally, Alan Boyd, who some of you might be familiar with. He's a veteran in the industry and has over 25 years experience and has a lot of experience working with all the different wheelchair manufacturers. We also have wheelchair users on our team that really help drive our innovation forward. And so we're really proud to have an incredibly diverse skill set and experience within our leadership team. So what is the problem that we're trying to solve? You heard a little bit about it in the background and the introduction to this talk, but really the main concern here is safety and accidents. So in a report, and this is a very conservative estimate and a self-report, that approximately 20% of power wheelchair or power mobility device users had experienced at least one major collision within the last year. And we see things like 33% resulted in damage to the mobility device. We also see a lot of damage to property that results from these sorts of accidents. And we've seen hospitalization from these sorts of injuries as well. And so really safety is a major concern, especially with power mobility device users. And that's the safety that we're trying to improve and increase with our system. So what is a blind spot sensor system? Our blind spot sensor system is a set of ultrasonic sensors, very similar to those that you have in your car, that can be attached to any wheelchair, essentially transforming it into a smart wheelchair. The system detects obstacles around the chair and then provides alerts to the driver or the user through 3 different types of modalities: lights, sounds, and vibrations. And in doing so, we're really trying to empower the user to navigate safely and independently. The system can be mounted on any wheelchair, manual or power, and then even within power wheelchairs, it can accommodate things like tilt, recline, elevate, standing, and all of that. And it is also extremely customizable. I don't have the time in this particular session today to talk about all of the different customizations, but it is a strength of the system, and it's very powerful in its ability to be able to be customized for individual client needs. And so I'll give you a little sneak peek of what some of those customizations are like. Essentially, our system is recommended for clients who would like a greater spatial awareness. So what are the benefits then of our sensors? For the end user, our sensors can increase independence and confidence by providing multimodal customizable feedback to our clients. For caregivers and institutions, our sensors can help reduce property damage and increase safety of not only the wheelchair user, but others in the environment as well. In terms of where our sensors are being used, they're really used across the board. We see them at home, in the community, long-term care, assisted living. Although the sensors are used indoors and outdoors, we see a much greater use for them indoors, especially navigating through tight spaces like elevators, doorways, narrow hallways, ramps, and so on. And the other neat part about our sensors is that they not only alert the user, but others in the environment as well. And we saw a really neat application of this during COVID, where a lot of our clients were unsure if others were socially distancing with them. And so a really neat thing that you can do with the system is adjust the distance at which the system alerts the user and others, for example, to 6 feet. And now you've got yourself a social distancing tool where you can give audio alerts or get audio alerts if anyone enters within that 6-foot threshold of the wheelchair user. So that was a really neat application we saw. We also serve a wide variety of clientele. So we have everything from the pediatric population as young as 6 years old. We also serve veterans and have clients as old as 90+ years of age. So again, using those universal design principles has really allowed our system to be widely used by a pretty wide age range of clientele as well. So why should you care about this technology? Well, most of us today drive cars that already have sensors built into them. And in fact, this sort of technology has been mandated in the automotive industry. So really the question is, why shouldn't wheelchair users have the same right to peace of mind and safety? Now, although I often make this analogy of sensors in cars and sensors on wheelchairs, really the analogy is far more fundamental than that. Most of us, even before any of us had sensors in our cars, we had rear view and side view mirrors in our cars that helped us to see what was around us. And putting mirrors on a wheelchair, for any of you who've tried that, can be fairly impractical, because now once you put those mirrors on the side, they can get knocked off pretty easily if you're going through doorways. And so really wheelchair users don't even have the most basic tool to be able to be aware of what's going on around them. And it's even more essential for wheelchair users because they do often have to navigate in tight spaces and often in spaces that are not wheelchair accessible. And so for anyone here who has never used a wheelchair, if you're sitting in an office chair, all you have to do is just try to turn around and look at the floor behind you while you're remaining seated, and you'll see how challenging that task is. And so add to that now any sort of upper mobility or dexterity challenges, seeing behind you is, if not impossible, is really challenging. And so really, we need to start seeing this technology as not some sort of nice to have or something for a very niche population of wheelchair users, but really something that needs to be a basic tool for every wheelchair user, and especially power wheelchair users. So in terms of who can then benefit, as I mentioned, really anyone who drives a power wheelchair, and perhaps even some manual wheelchair users who might have some sort of visual loss or neglect, but especially individuals who have some of the symptoms that I mentioned here, or challenges that I mentioned here, would definitely benefit from our system. So clients who might have low vision, blindness, or spatial neglect. If they've got limited upper body or neck mobility, then they might not be able to do a shoulder check. Now, this is an interesting one because a lot of clients who are even identified for power mobility use are clients who might not have the upper body mobility or strength in order to be able to propel a manual wheelchair. So in some ways, the justification for having a blind spot sensors is very much aligned with their justification for power mobility in the first place, because if they don't have the upper body mobility to self-propel, they might not also have the upper body mobility to really be able to look and see what's behind them. So we often see range of motion as a justification for our system. If the client is mostly a safe driver, but needs some help with attending them to the driving task, maybe they get distracted or have impaired attention, then this could be a system that can help them attend to the driving task. So here are just some examples. Now I do want to point out that when we're looking at clients who can benefit from this technology, we do want to make sure that the client can in fact operate their wheelchair safely, that they have the decision-making abilities and the judgment to be able to control the wheelchair safely, because otherwise, of course, there's questions about whether they're eligible for power wheelchair use in the first place. And so we certainly are not here to turn bad drivers or drivers that are incapable of driving safely into good drivers. We're really looking at clients who are capable of driving power wheelchair, but really just need that additional spatial awareness. And you can, again, kind of draw an analogy here. You don't need to be an unsafe driver to need rear view and side view mirrors in your car, right? Everyone needs those basic tools to be able to succeed. And so really that's how you need to think about these sensors. We're just giving everyone a fair shot so that they can prove and demonstrate their ability to drive safely. Now, in addition to client abilities, I also suggest that you look into the types of technologies and even the kind of wheelchair that your client is using. So for example, if you've got a client that's using alternative drive, so say they're using head arrays or sip and puffs or eye gaze, those sorts of devices actually require the client to face forwards when they're driving, which means that we've kind of compromised now their peripheral vision and their rear visibility. And so the sensors might be, one way of helping them get some of that visibility back or have a little bit more awareness of what's going on while they're using those sorts of drive controls. If the client needs to drive in a tilted position, that's also going to limit their rear and peripheral vision. If they've got objects that they need that's hanging off the wheelchair, so for example, oxygen tanks or backpacks or communication tablets or extended leg rests, all of those might be hindering their ability to see around them. So the blind spot sensors can help with all of those as well. Finally, in addition to their technology, we also want to look at their environment. So if you've got a client who lives in a very tight space, maybe lives in a space that's not very accessible to them or has to navigate often in spaces that are tight spaces, the blind spot sensors can be beneficial there. And I'll show you some videos of those sorts of environments and how the sensors can help in those particular scenarios. Here is just a slide that I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I think it's a great resource. It's a very comprehensive article that was written by Dr. Rid Simpson, who is one of my research colleagues as well. He wrote this paper back in 2008. So a lot of these numbers that are on this slide have only gone up since then, and we do expect those numbers to be quite a bit higher today. But I wanted to just show you some of these numbers. And so in this article, what Dr. Simpson did was he looked at various diagnoses. I've only picked out 4 here, but he had quite a bit more. And he looked at within those diagnoses, how many people would require a wheelchair. And this includes both manual and power wheelchairs. And then of that population, he looked at what percentage have certain symptoms that might create challenges in operating a wheelchair safely. And so here are some of those examples. For example, spinal cord injury. Over 66,000 people with spinal cord injury are expected to need a wheelchair, and up to 100% of them have limited head or neck movement. And so according to this breakdown, Dr. Simpson predicted that up to 91% of wheelchair users, manual and power, would benefit from smart wheelchairs. And again, we believe that these numbers have only gotten higher since then, but I think this is a great resource and maybe a good reference if you're trying to justify this for your client. So I'm going to take a quick pause there, and I'm going to bring up a demo here. Please do keep the questions coming. Just going to spotlight this for everyone. Are you able to spotlight me here? I don't seem to be able to spotlight myself. Marty?
Let me see just a second here.
Marty, you should just be able to click on her name, and the option to spotlight will be there in the more options.
Just 1 second here.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So before I go through a quick live demo here, I'm just going to show you the components that are part of our system and our most popular packages. So here on the bottom is what we call the Sentina system. It is a sensor system with 180 degrees of horizontal coverage and about 45 to 50 degrees of vertical coverage. Now, typically, the Sentina system is mounted in the rear of a wheelchair. However, it can be mounted in the front as well if you do have clients with low vision, perhaps clients that have just difficulties with depth perception directly in front of them and need sort of a 180-degree sweep, then the Sentina might be useful and can be mounted in the front as well. So that's the Sentina system. And then we also have a smaller sensor here, which is called the echo head. Now, the echo head is typically mounted in the front of the chair, usually pointed at a bit of a diagonal, a 45-degree angle. And that typically helps with going through doorways and elevators and all of those tight spaces. So it helps with clients to align in those sorts of tight spaces. We typically see two of these echo heads, one on the left and one on the right. And we can have up to 3 echo heads plugged into a Sentina system. Some other locations for these echo heads include close to the footrest. We've seen clients that have broken their toes because they didn't know that they were getting too close to something and then didn't realize that they had broken their toes, so that can be quite problematic. We've also seen echo heads placed close to the headrest because clients might recline and tilt without realizing how far they can go before drilling a hole in the wall. And so we've seen echo heads being mounted there as well to help prevent some of that damage. But really what I like to do typically when I'm trying to understand where the sensors need to be mounted is I'll just walk around the wheelchair and see where the most amount of damage is. And that usually gives me a pretty good clue as to where we should be mounting these sensors. And then the final component here is what we call the controller. Now the controller provides both visual and auditory feedback, and I'll be going over that in just a second, and also provides the ability to be able to turn the system on and off, to toggle through the different modes that I'll be showing you, and to turn on and off the audio as well as the vibration feedback. Okay, so let's turn the system on right now. And I'm going to do that by simply pressing the big button here. And what happens right here, I'm just going to pull away from as much as I can. Okay, so now what we see is a blue light in the middle. And hopefully you can see that color okay. There's a little bit of glare in this room. But the middle light, that blue light, indicates that the system is on and it is in short range mode. So that's mode 1, short range. Now in short range mode, if anything is within 2 feet, like my laptop that is currently in front of the sensors, a warning indicator will go off. The warning indicator is a yellow light, as you might be able to see there in the bottom row. The lights there on the bottom, sorry, I just got in front of the sensor there. The lights there on the bottom correspond with the Sentina system here, the bigger sensor system that's usually pointed backwards. And the top row corresponds to the echo head that's right here. So we'll go through this in order. So here I am within 2 feet, and we see some yellow lights lighting up that the echo head as well as the Sentina sees. And then as I get closer, you'll notice that some of the lights turn red. I'm actually going to put my hand in front so you can follow along there on that bottom row. And you see as my hand moves, we get red lights going across. So you're getting location on these 3 different lights, left, middle, and right, as well as proximity through the color. Yellow for warning at 2 feet, red for danger at 1 foot. And I can do the same thing here with the echo head as well. If I put my hand in front of there, you'll see that red light coming up there as well. So we usually have the top row that corresponds to the echo heads because, as I said earlier, echo heads are typically placed in the front of the chair. And so if you've got a client that's looking at this controller, which is typically mounted close to the joystick, they'll see that any lights that pop up on the top row are things that are in front of them, and any lights that come on the bottom row are obstacles behind them. So that's how the light feedback works, and that's how everything works in short range mode. Now, if I click on this button again, we go into long range mode. Now in long range mode, everything is the same as I said earlier, except that the distances are all doubled. So instead of 1 foot for danger, you're going to have 2 feet for danger. And instead of 2 feet for warning, you're going to have 4 feet for warning. So essentially the sensors are just looking out further away. And this is useful if you have a client, for example, they might want the short range mode in their home where everything is a lot closer and tighter, and long range mode when they're driving outdoors, maybe, or in the grocery store or in the malls or something like that, where they might want the sensors to be looking out further and to give them an alert a little bit earlier. If they've got delayed reaction times, they might also want the long range mode so that they get an alert a little bit earlier than otherwise. So those are the two different range, the short range and the long range modes. So I'm going to go back into short range now. That's the visual feedback, which is through the lights. So let's look at the other types of feedback now. The next kind of feedback is audio. So now you'll see that you've got a bunch of yellow lights and no audio, and that's because we don't have any audio feedback in the warning zone. But as soon as I get in danger, and I'm going to turn the audio in the button on, the switch on. We don't hear anything now until I get into danger. As soon as I get in that danger zone, we hear the beeps going off, just basically that alert says you're too close, stop. So that is the audio alert. Now, not only is the audio alert useful for the user, it's, of course, as I mentioned earlier, useful to others as well. So if anyone else gets in that personal space, in that 1 foot space, the audio alert is going to go off. And so we see a lot of clients who really benefit from this, especially when they are in crowded spaces, or if they're trying to get out in an elevator while other people are trying to get in. Those audio alerts actually really help with helping others in the environment also respect the personal space of the user and give them the space that they need to be able to maneuver safely. So that is a great advantage of the audio feedback. And I've turned that off. And finally, we have the last feedback modality here, which is vibration. So if I turn that on, we activate the vibration module. Here's an example of a vibration module. We usually have 3 of these, one on the left, the center, and the right. And the way that these work is, for example, if you're going through a doorway and you're too close to the right side of the doorway, then the right side of the chair will vibrate. If you're too close to the left side of the chair will vibrate. And these modules are typically placed in the seat cushion, the armrest, or the backrest, wherever the client has sensation. So they're fairly adaptable in that sense, and can be placed wherever the client can sense them the best. So that's the vibration modality. Those are all the 3 different types of modalities there. Now, the other thing to note here is that while the distances that I showed you are the default distances, all of them can be customized. So the distances can be customized anywhere from a couple of inches all the way out to 6 feet. So there's a huge range in what the sensors can see. That is how the feedback works. A couple of more points here. This is a USB device. So for those who are wondering how is the system powered, there are a few different ways in which it can be powered. Since it is a USB device, it can be plugged in or powered by a small battery pack like this. This is just a standard power bank that is about 2200 milliamp hours. A small power bank like this, if charged overnight, can power the system for 10 to 12 hours. So that is a way to provide power to the system that is completely independent of the power chair. It would work for manual wheelchairs as well. So you've got an independent power source. Now, if you have a client that's in a power chair, then you have a few more options. So we have XLR USB adapters that can be plugged into the charge port of the wheelchair itself. And that way, this system can just draw power from the chair directly. And it's a very, very low draw. So that's not something that you need to be concerned about. And it can also be plugged directly into a USB hub. So some of the chairs actually come with the hub, and you can simply plug the system into the hub and it can get power from there too. So a few different options there. And finally, we also have a 3.5 millimeter jack, which is a little bit hard to see here because it's all black, but there's a jack there where you can plug in a buddy button. So if you do have a client that is unable to operate the toggle button here and can't turn the system on and off through the button, they can do that through their own buddy button that's mounted somewhere where it's more accessible to them. So that is it for my demo. And I'll bring back my slides now so we can go through some of the Q&A, and I can also go through some case studies here. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of customizations that can be done. Some examples are the colors that you notice, the red and the yellow. If you've got clients with color blindness, we can change the colors. We can change the brightness of the lights. We can also change how the feedback is issued to the client. So say they want audio alerts for the rear and they want vibration alerts for the front. We can set all of that up through the app. The app is called Braze Connect. It's a free app that's available on Android and iPhone. And you do need a system, a sensor system to be able to use the app. But once you have a system, then it's extremely easy to use, and it will automatically Bluetooth pair with your system. And then you'll be able to make all of the adjustments in real time. So those are some of the customizations. As I mentioned, the distances can all be programmed as well, and they can be programmed for each individual sensor to go anywhere from 2 inches to 6 feet. Okay. In terms of durability, sensors are not waterproof, but they're about as water resistant as the chair itself. What that means is that the system can withstand splash, but they will fail if they're submerged in water. So you definitely can't take the sensors out for a dive. And although we can't guarantee that the system can withstand all climates, we have tested them fairly comprehensively in a wide range of climates and conditions, including rain and snow and all the extreme temperatures. And we certainly haven't received any complaints for our customers who have used them in very extreme temperatures. Okay, so going right into some case studies here. This is the first case study. Phil, who is a 68-year-old veteran who has ALS, traumatic brain injury, legally blind. And his story is that when he first started losing his vision, he was driving down the hallway in his power chair. He'd been driving for many, many years, over 20 years, and ended up crashing into a baby stroller. Luckily, the stroller was empty. There was no baby in it, but it really hurt his confidence. And knowing that he was going to continue to lose his vision, he really wanted to look for a solution that would help him maintain his independence and mobility and dignity. And he ended up finding our system. And coincidentally, the Minneapolis VA, where his therapists are, had also purchased an eval kit and knew how the system worked. So they immediately did an eval with Phil. And after configuring it for him, Phil actually became one of our first clients that uses a Sentina 360 configuration. So he uses a Sentina, the 180 in the back and in the front, and uses all 3 types of modalities, the lights, audio, and the vibration, although the vibration is by far his favorite because he is legally blind. So this was a great example, and Phil has even used our system when he traveled independently for the first time to the Hines VA, where he did some power chair skills training and white cane training. And the sensors were incredibly helpful to him in navigating those unfamiliar spaces. So this was really a great example of the blind spot sensors being used. And this was a case study that was actually published in the VA national newsletter by his therapist at the Minneapolis VA. And it talks about the whole story of how this system worked for Phil and how it was configured. In the last photo there in the bottom right, you see Phil who's actually using an older version of our customization app. And so he really likes to be pretty hands-on, and he was able to fine-tune his system when he went into the different environment, when he went away from home, to make sure that the sensors were going to be working for him as he wanted in a different environment than usual. Here's Katie, quite a bit younger than Phil, who's a very, very skilled power wheelchair user, actually uses a head array. And the reason I highlight that she's a really skilled user is because a lot of times when we think of candidates for this sort of system, we think of people who are very noticeably struggling with their power chair. And what we don't realize is that power wheelchair users across the board are doing a lot of damage in their homes and in different types of property. And so Katie was an example of someone who's very skilled, but when she would back through a doorway, she wouldn't really know, how far she was from the center of the doorway. So she would come out in front, and then she would kind of keep zigzagging, doing her shoulder checks, inadvertently activate her head array, and end up doing a lot of damage in the doorway going back. And so her therapist asked if we had a solution to help her better align in the doorway. And so we went out, did an eval, and within 30 minutes, which is, I think, incredible, and that just goes to show how just what a fast learner Katie is, because that's not usually a skill I teach within the first training session. But within the first 30 minutes, we got Katie backing through the doorway without doing any damage. And the way she was able to do that was she was able to get out in front of the doorway, first align before going through, get centered through the visual and auditory feedback, and then all she had to do was back straight through. So that was really, really, not only increasing her safety, but what we've seen for a lot of clients is actually enhances their wheelchair skills, which is really important to me as a researcher, because of course I want to make sure that we're not just getting people overly dependent on the technology, but are actually making them more independent and doing things that they wouldn't have otherwise done. And so we've certainly seen a lot more comfort with doing things like backing out of elevators, which is a really useful thing to do, because then you don't have to spin around in the elevator and potentially roll over people's toes. But backing through an elevator can be very challenging. It was very scary for one of our clients who had never done that before, but with the system, he was confident enough that he backed out of an elevator for the first time and was thrilled, because that was a really useful skill for him to have. This third client here is Betty, who is a long-term care resident. And Betty was highlighted to us by the long-term care staff as perhaps one of our biggest success stories. The reason for that was Betty had been a long-term power wheelchair user, but she was identified at risk of losing her power mobility device. And the reason for this was because they were noticing some incidents with Betty. They were seeing some damage in her bathrooms. They were concerned about her backing out in the dining hall and potentially running into people there. And so they had restricted her driving indoors and had also prohibited her from going to the mall outdoors on her own, which is something that she really enjoyed doing, and it really gave her a high quality, a sort of sense of high quality of life. And so before they took the power wheelchair away, luckily they trialed her with the Braze system, because they'd seen success with other residents in the same facility with our system. Within 8 months of Betty purchasing the system and using it, I went back into the facility and I was told that all of the restrictions had been removed. They were now allowing Betty to drive to the mall on her own, which not only gave her that independence and mobility back, but also improved her moods. And so they were seeing, Betty smiling a lot more, and just in a generally better sense of sort of overall sense of well-being, which really goes to show how important power mobility is for our clients and how important it is for us to ensure that they have their power mobility device for as long as possible. In this case, one thing that I do want to mention is oftentimes especially when someone's aging, we tend to think that, when we start seeing incidents, that it's a result of perhaps cognitive decline or something along those lines. However, in Betty's case, what we saw was, it wasn't really a cognitive decline. It was just, it was very simple in that she had a custom footrest that was protruding quite a bit. And so she couldn't see at the end of her feet, which is why she was doing damage when she would get under the bathroom sink. And so simply having that spatial awareness around her feet prevented her from having those accidents. Similarly, in the dining hall, not only would Betty get an alert when she was backing up if someone was behind her, but the other residents that were behind her would get that alert as well, so they could stay out of the way. So again, what this goes to show is it's not just the wheelchair user's responsibility. We all have a responsibility to ensure that we're creating that sort of space where wheelchair users can actually navigate safely. And so in that way, we're offering a technology here that could potentially modify behaviors of not only the wheelchair user, but others in the environment as well. And then finally, this is Wade, who is a very active wheelchair user, both manual and power wheelchair, and he wanted a system for both, mainly because he traveled a lot nationally, internationally, and also had challenges in his home, which was very inaccessible, had some really tight spaces. So I'm going to play some videos here so you get to see the system in action, and then I will get to the question around pricing. I know that's always an interesting one and an important one to address, so I will get to that as well. So here's just a video of Wade driving out from his bedroom out into the living room, something that he needed to do every day. And if you look closely there, the walls have a lot of paint scraped off. There's a lot of damage there. In the front and the bottom of the image, you'll notice the baseboard's been ripped out, something that's a common theme in his home and a lot of other homes that I visited. And so there's a lot of damage being done, very awkward space. He also uses a front wheel drive configuration, which can again add to some of the challenges maneuvering in these sorts of spaces. And you'll see now how this client is going to maneuver out with using simply the audio, the visual and vibration feedback, visual and vibration. So there is no audio that you'll hear, but he is feeling vibrations in his backrest and he's looking at the lights. Okay, so you notice there that there was that was pretty smooth in terms of his maneuvering. Definitely saved him a lot of damage in his home and a lot of cursing that his wife no longer has to listen to. So here's another quick video of Wade navigating in his kitchen. Again, a very tight space. The camera is pretty much at the other end of his kitchen, so that's all the space he has, and he'll talk about maneuvering here. You will hear him talk about a green light. I just want to point out a quick note here. When he talks about the green light, he's actually referring to the yellow warning light. Wade did have some color blindness, so we had to adjust the colors for him. So again, green is equivalent in this case to the yellow warning indicator. Here, I'll play this through.
Usually when I come into my kitchen, I have extreme problems as it is. It's a tight space. It was never designed for a wheelchair, but being in a wheelchair and being that I like to cook, I have to come into my kitchen. And doing so, as you can see, it's a very tight space. And having to drive in leaves me no alternative but to drive out and back out. As I'm backing out, it is impossible for me to be able to see the doorway behind me and to see the handle that is on this fridge, which, by the way, has been torn off this fridge a number of times and glued back on. But with this device, I don't even have to look behind me or try to look. I just look at the light system, which right now is giving me 3 green lights, and as well as vibrating pads that are in my back are telling me as I back up, if I am in the center of the doorway, as long as none of these lights turn red, I know that I am centered and I am not going to hit anything. As well, there's vibrating pads in my back. If I am looking straight ahead and not at the lights, if I'm carrying something or as I'm coming out, it will warn me. So if one of the pads, the left one goes off, I know I'm about to tear the handle off my fridge. If the right one goes off, I know I'm about to hit this doorway, which already has no paint left on it. And so as the lights stay green, I back out. And as you can see, I have not hit anything. Straight out through the door. Even though that is such a tight space, I've made it without touching or damaging anything.
Okay, so here are some of the different products that we offer. So I mentioned the Sentina that you saw, the 180 degrees. I also mentioned echo heads, which can be plugged into the Sentina. Now the echo heads can also be plugged into the Hydra configuration. Hydra configuration is really simple. It's simply a black box where you can plug in up to 3 echo heads. And the reason we have this configuration is because say you have a client who does not need the 180. Maybe this client never backs up. Maybe they only have neglect in one side. And so they just want a small area covered off. Then the Hydra configuration might be more cost effective. And then finally, the vibration modules are an option that need to be added on. The visual and audio come default, but the vibration needs to be added on. They are fairly inexpensive, but the reason we want them to be added on is because we want to make sure that your client is not going to have any sort of negative spastic reaction to the vibration module. So once you check in with them, then you can add that option on as well. Here, let's get to pricing. So I'm going to show you some MSRPs here. Now, I do want to mention that we are offering discounts to all the ATAP programs. And in fact, I will discuss this with the national organization as well. But if we can get multiple ATAP centers across the country purchasing, I will commit to offering further discounts. So if we can gather a bunch of interest across all of the ATAP centers, then we can offer some volume-based discounting as well, in addition to the standard discounting that we have. But I'm going to show you some MSRPs here so you have some idea as to what these cost. So the Braze Hydra Duo, this is a very, as the name indicates, it's a Hydra system. So it's just a black box with simply 2 echo heads, Here's an example of what it might look like for someone with left neglect. So you could have potentially 1 or 2 echo heads that are in that side there, and you can configure them as you want. But here's just an example. The most popular package that we have, which is essentially our eval kit that we would provide as sort of a demo kit, is the Sentina Plus kit. So the Sentina Plus is 180 degrees in the back, so you can see this bird's eye view that shows you all the coverage. 180 in the back, and the 2 echo heads that give you that little bit of diagonal for the peripheral vision. So this package runs around $3,000 MSRP. And so we do have some different options for these sort of eval demo kits that will run anywhere from $3,000 to $4,000 MSRPs, not including our discounts, of course. So those are what I would recommend, and it just really just depends on what components that you want on hand for your eval. But the lowest cost there is about $3,000 MSRP that gives you that sort of coverage. And then the other bundle that I've included here, we do have a few others, but I wanted to give you a range. So the one all the way on the right is the Braze Sentina 360, which does 180 in the rear and in the front. So that gives you an idea as to all the different bundles that we provide. The one in the middle there is what we see, I'd say 80 to 90% of the time. And certainly if you're getting an eval kit, that's the one that you're interested in. Here's some pictures of what this system looks like on a chair. So on the left, you see what the controller, typically where it would be mounted would be adjacent to the joystick, and that way it swings in and out with the joystick as well. On the right, you see an example of the sensors that have been installed on our Permobil chair. And so that's typically where the sensors are located. In the rear, they typically be just on the power base there, so that the client can see what's behind them, and also a bit lower to the ground, which is where we see a lot of clients struggle. Here's the setup on a manual chair. So you can also put a Sentina on the back of a manual chair. This is a real install of a client that lives in a skilled nursing facility, and this is something that he's been using, I'd say, for probably about a year now, and he's actually been doing really well with this system indoors in his facility, where he was having some challenges in tight spaces and with other residents. And so here you see a Sentina, again, a Sentina Plus configuration, Sentina in the rear, and 2 echo heads on the front casters. And the controller here is on a clamp mount right under his armrest. And what you will notice, and that I didn't mention earlier, is a lot of our mounts are GoPro compatible, which means we have a lot of versatility in how you can mount the sensors. And we have yet to come across a wheelchair that we've not been able to mount the sensors to. So a lot of adaptability and versatility there. Here is a Hydra system. So just 3 echo heads. The black box is tucked away somewhere that you can't see it, but the 3 sensors there are placed under the handlebars and on the backrest. And in this case, you saw Wade earlier in his power chair. This is now Wade in his manual wheelchair. And here he has the controller mounted on a gooseneck, which is portable, and he wanted something like that because he travels so often, and so wanted to be easily able to clamp it on and off as he traveled. Now, I also want to share with you some very recent clinical evidence. As I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, being a researcher, I'm very interested in also ensuring that we are gathering and incorporating clinical and research evidence. So this was a study that was published at the end of last year. This is the first type of study that's really been done with a commercial smart wheelchair technology like this. So in this particular study, what was measured was power wheelchair users, and this was a very simple task. They simply had to be seated in their the power chair that they used. They were all deemed to be eligible, so they were existing power wheelchair users with varying levels of experience, and they were asked to identify obstacles in the rear. So this was only testing their rear visibility. And the result of the study was actually quite surprising, even to me. And so what we found was that for low static obstacles, so obstacles that were not moving, that were in the rear, clients were able to detect obstacles with 96% accuracy with the blind spot sensors and only 44% without the sensors. They were able to detect with the sensors in 2.6 seconds versus 7.3 seconds without the sensors. So not only were they significantly more accurate, they were also faster with the sensors. With the high static obstacles, again, you see a significant difference there, 94 versus 53% with versus without the sensors, and 4.1 versus 6.2 seconds with and without. For dynamic obstacles, we see that clients were able to do a bit better with the without the sensors. So they were at 80% accuracy, possibly because the dynamic obstacle was actually something like a little robot that was driving towards them. So they potentially heard audio cues and could tell when the obstacle was approaching. But when we introduced what's called a dual task, so when clients were also focused on something in front of them as they were trying to detect the obstacle behind them, then their accuracy dropped to 59% without the sensors, but their accuracy remained high with the sensors at 93%. So what does this all mean? Well, it means a few things. It means that even for wheelchair users that are deemed to be safe, and have not been highlighted as participants that have any sort of concerns around safety, the accuracy here is incredibly low. And what we're seeing is that clients are essentially just guessing what's behind them, which is perhaps not as surprising given just how much of a blind spot wheelchairs in themselves kind of create with the backrest and the headrest. And so really what this shows is the importance of having a tool for rear visibility. And again, understanding that really this is an issue across the board for wheelchair users. And the fact that 44% is essentially the baseline, right? Clients were allowed to do shoulder checks or whatever they would normally do. So 44% is the baseline for clients in terms of being able to detect low static obstacles. So that's really shocking, and it really goes again to show the importance and the need for this sort of technology. So I hope there'll be much more evidence that we see in the near future as well. But this is the first of many, and it really shows some very promising justification for the importance of this technology. So in terms of funding sources, I often get asked who's funding these devices. We have seen all kinds of funding: auto insurance, commercial insurance, Office of Vocational Rehab. In fact, we also had recently a state blind rehab program, Veterans Affairs, Workers' Comp, and we are seeing funding from state Medicaid programs. So as an example, just in Ohio, in the state of Ohio, we saw Aetna Medicaid, CareSource, which is also Medicaid program, and Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield. So those are some examples in a single state. We are getting more and more across the country. And now that we are partnered with the durable equipment, medical equipment providers like NewMotion, NSM, and a bunch of regional dealers, there's more potential now to be able to apply for reimbursement. Now, there are also some other potential funding sources that we haven't even tapped into yet that we think could be good candidates. And that includes, for example, the waiver program in Medicaid. And we've also seen success with local advocacy groups and charities in Canada. So that might be another avenue. Now, just the last few slides here, I want to quickly mention what our sensors do not do, because I've spoken so much about what they do. So our system does not currently detect curbs or drop-offs. So please keep that in mind. While the current system does not do that, we do currently have a pretty big collaboration going on with the VA, where we're developing this sort of technology, and we have several VA hospitals that bid on us in a challenge, and we're working with them all through the summer. So we're very excited about this, and we will keep everyone posted on the developments of this project. The second thing that we do not do is we do not interfere with the wheelchair controls at all. So we don't interfere with the electronics. We do not slow down or stop the system, at least not with the system that I showed you. We do have technology that can do this, but before I show you that, I do want to quickly go through the caveats of that sort of technology. So really the advantage of blind spot sensors is they leave the user fully in control, right? They're only a warning system. They supplement existing information and do not replace good judgment, and they inform both the user and others in the environment so everyone can act appropriately. Now, with semi-autonomous systems, or ones that do take control in some way, whether through slowing down or stopping, even if temporarily, they take control away from the user. This, according to clinical evidence that I myself have been involved with, and a lot of my research colleagues, these sorts of tech systems can cause confusion, frustration, and/or accidents for users who are unable to identify that a malfunction has occurred and might not be able to override the system, which is kind of a paradox, because typically you're looking at clients that might have cognitive issues or motor control issues for this sort of system, because you might think, well, they need a system that can automatically do it for them. Unfortunately, those sorts of clients are also at the highest risk for not being able to override a malfunction. So something to really keep in mind. And also this sort of technology really can't predict the intent of the user or others in the environment. So it's really hard for a system like this to be able to tell what is the right thing to do. You know, what if a client needs to crash into a cardboard box in order to save that child? So those are all the kinds of things that you need to consider. So with all of that said, we do have technology that can slow down and stop the chair. This was a technology that won in the OT Inventor Showcase a couple of years ago. Here's just a quick demonstration. Here you can see a demonstration with just a direction pad, but the system is automatically slowing down and stopping the client and not allowing him to drive in the direction of the obstacle. This is a module that's layered on top of the blind spot sensor system, so it still offers the warning, but we really envision this being used as more as training wheels in a controlled, safe environment under the supervision of a therapist. And if you're interested in exploring that application, please reach out to us. It's not a widely commercially available system, but we can certainly explore some applications and training with you. And we also finally have an app called Braze, which you can download for free on Android and iPhone. And this is a system that you can potentially use to screen clients who might be or might not be a fit for the Braze system. So if you are wanting to see whether a client is responsive to audio or visual alerts or vibration alerts, we have a really neat way of just testing that out with an app alone, where you don't need the system, you don't need the sensors. You can just push a button and see if your client can respond to an auditory or visual feedback. So that's something that I'm happy to speak about more as well. And that is it. And so this is some contact information, our website. If you have any clients that you think can benefit, you can fill out an intake form at the quote page there, brazemobility.com/quote. And if you have any questions, please reach out, info@brazemobility or 1-877-BRAZE-CO, which is 272-9326. Thank you. And I think that is it. Hopefully I've answered all the questions here. If you've got any other questions, please feel free to ask me now.
Just wait a couple seconds, see if we have any more questions for you. And we will also be putting the presentation on our YouTube page and also on our website. And yeah, that would be something I think states would definitely be interested in, is the possibility of some volume discount if there were to be enough states who were interested in purchasing for demo center. So yeah, that's something we can talk about, and we can post information on some of our lists later on.
Sure, and we can send you a one-pager that has the information about what's included and what the discounts and stuff are as well to you directly, Marty, and then that way you can share that information with everyone too.
That sounds great. Well, if I don't see any more questions, I want to thank you so much for coming in and talking with some of our state programs today. Really appreciate it, and I think people learned a lot. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm feel really great that I was invited to be part of this, and the fact that we were able to get the word out to all the ATAP centers. You know, hopefully covered different areas of the country. But thank you so much for organizing.
You bet. And so with that, we'll go ahead and close off. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and we will talk to you all later. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye, everyone. Have a great day.